because the independence of India had created a political environment. In fact, in the final stages of our independence movement, all colonial movements arose as a result. And a number of these movements were led by people of Indian origin, or they played a significant role in the Chedi Jagan in Guyana, or you can see in case of Kenya, the first newspaper and first labor union both were created by Indians there. Pinto and people like that. There were a number of Indians in the independence movement of Kenya with Jomo Kenyatta. Fiji, same thing. Koya, Adi Patel, a number of these Indians who actually inspired the independence movement of Fiji. The native Fijians were not that keen on independence. It's the Indian who settled down there who created this environment. They all had networking with the Congress party. There was some were called branches. That's how it is called, MIC, Malaysian Indian Congress. So they came into, when these colonies, so Nehru's foreign policy for India, these were the central pillars of our foreign policy: anti-colonialism, anti-apartheid, non-aligned, and be with Africa and Asia. And this Afro-Asia solidarity as seen in Bandung. Now, that gave India a larger than life political role in international relations. We did not have an economy to back it. We did not have a military to back it. Yet we were one of the very prominent players in the international political scene. And this was, so to enable that, it was very important that we were in the forefront of this. So rightly now, he could not rightly differentiate segment. He had to give priority to this. So the question of people of Indian origin, his policy was that you become the good citizens of the country where you are settled, identify yourself with the people of that country, and if I may say, without explicitly saying so ever, primacy to the interests of the locals. So there are questions in the Indian Parliament on the overseas Indians. One of the members of Parliament who took very keen interest in the subject was, from first Lok Sabha onwards, Seth Govindas, member of Parliament from Lok Sabha from Jabalpur. Also a great literature. He has written some very good books, including Hindi novels, Seth Govindas. Seth Govindas took up this question repeatedly in the Lok Sabha. And Nehru, in answer to a question to Seth Govindas in 1955 in the Parliament, said, our interests in these people is primarily cultural and civilizational. They are citizens of a foreign country. We will help them in things like education, culture, and to retain their meet their cultural and civilizational needs. So it's a fairly substantial change if you compare that with 1937 speech of Nehru in Singapore. Then comes, and around this time or a little before, in fact 48 onwards, Nehru was faced with a difficult question of policy towards overseas Indians. And that was two countries posed this challenge, both neighbors. The Indian community in Myanmar, or Burma as it was called then, and Indian community in Sri Lanka. As you probably know, that the Indians had to leave Myanmar or Burma during the Second World War. The Japanese captured Burma. At that time, Indians almost completely dominated the professions in Burma. Most of the school teachers, university teachers, lawyers, doctors were the Indians. Chettiar community of Tamil Nadu were the biggest money lenders in many countries in Southeast Asia, Malaysia also, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, some even in Indonesia, and the French colonies of Vietnam, Laos. But their biggest operation was in Burma. I think it may still be called Burma Bazaar. Chennai or earlier Madras also have money from Burma, Myanmar. So these Chettiars were the biggest absentee landlords, because typically what you saw in the Hindi films of the 50s or 60s, I guess you are all too young, you have no interest in films of that kind. But if you see that how the village money lenders operation, and the interest grows in several multiples over the principal amount. So that is how exactly it happened in Myanmar or Burma. And the farmer who had pledged his land will never be able to repay, and eventually Chettiar will get that land. So Chettiars became the biggest landlords of Burma. Deeply resented, as resented in India, you have, even today you are familiar with the suicide deaths of Vidarbha, etc. So these Chettiars were deeply resented by the Burmese rural population. So first challenge comes in 48, they take a citizenship law, you say no, you take the citizenship or you become an alien. So they offered citizenship under the naturalization, not with full political rights. Naturalized citizens. Then came General Navin. General Navin introduced a policy of Burmanization, that all work of Burma will be done in Burmese and not in English. Now, Indians' core competence in Rangoon or Yangon was that they were the ones who did all this work. So with that, Indians lost the advantage. A number of these Chettiars had to earlier leave because of, and he did the nationalization. Now his policy of nationalization meant that large number of these people fled Burma. Nehru was in no position to oppose it for several reasons, very practical reasons. One, we ourselves had abolished Jamidari in India. We ourselves said we don't want to encourage absentee landlordism and exploitation of small farmer. We ourselves had said commanding heights when we will set up public sector. Socialism was the declared policy of the Congress party, the famous Awali resolution of the Congress. Now how do you say that it is good for India but it is not good for you? We had of course not done it in agriculture except abolishing the zamindari. Otherwise we had not abolished private sector. So, plus when Navin had come, by that time 62 war had taken place and India standing had taken a severe jolt, hitting in the international arena because of our losing the border war with China. By then we have also started food shortages and all had started showing. We were becoming more and more import dependent on food. So prestige of India had taken a big hit. But the Indian community in Burma who had to leave, they felt that the government has not stood by them, that they have not been able to, India did not exert to get them a fair compensation or fair deal from the Burmese government. As you probably all of you know, that till 1937, Burma was a part of India, as per the British colonial administration. And they reported to the Governor General and to the Governor. It's only after 37 it was separated, and the Congress party said that's a good thing. And so Indians did not require any travel document to go to Burma. And no citizenship, nothing was required. So here we were faced now with the situation, those who did not become naturalized citizens at that very time, they became the stateless. And even today now there are only two countries where we have really stateless Indians in any significant number. They are in Burma or Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Gradually the number is going down, becoming naturalized citizens. Then other challenge before Nehru came in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, the same thing happened, and we had Tamil workers from India, and these Tamil workers number was quite substantial. If I remember, it was close to a million, around a million or so of Indian Tamils. Sri Lanka, not the Sri Lankan Tamils, I'm talking of the Indian Tamils. Now Sri Lankans were not keen that these Indians should continue there. So John Kotlawala, who was their first Prime Minister, the Sinhalas said these people were brought by the British for plantation. We have enough people, now these people should leave. These people were second, third generation in many cases. They said, we were not brought, our grandfather may have been brought. But geographical proximity, they had very close connections with India, with their relatives, with everybody. So it became a contentious issue between India and Sri Lanka. Nehru would say that only those who are entitled to Indian citizenship under the constitution adopted by us on 26 January 1950, under the Article 8 of that constitution, those who qualify can come to India. Those who don't qualify are a problem of Sri Lankan government. This tussle continued. Then Lal Bahadur Shastri entered into an agreement with Shri Mavo Bandaranaike and agreed to take about 500,000 of these people back to India, and Sri Lanka agreed to give citizenship to 300,000 Tamilians, and no problem, don't worry, no, it's okay. No problem. It's closed. Not to worry at all. But in 1974, Indira Gandhi and then it was further followed up in their meeting in 74, where they agreed to take 50% each of the remaining 150,000 Indians, whose status was still ambiguous. The two agreements could not be implemented because of the reluctance of Indian Tamils to move back to India. The ethnic violence in Sri Lanka brought the process to complete halt, and the Sri Lankan Parliament eventually passed a resolution in 1988 to enable all Indian Tamils to get Sri Lankan citizenship. Now again, the government of India faced severe criticism of this aspect of the diaspora policy, that we did not forcefully protect the interests of Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka. Other challenges that came in the way of Nehru and subsequently more, I would say not so much Nehru as much as of his successors, mainly Indira Gandhi, was in East Africa. When Kenya became independent, or the East Africa, all three colonies became independent: Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania. There was aggressive nationalism, and the policy led to, which meant that the Indians were sidelined, and there was generally a deep resentment, though because of a misperception all Indians were rich, which was not the case. Some Indians were very rich, and overall, yes, the Indian economic standards were better than the local Africans' economic standard, because of entrepreneurship, because of education, and because the colonial government brought them in to look after all the administrative positions and of the lower levels. So with that resentment against Indians, there was aggressive nationalism one witnessed in Kenya, Uganda. Tanzania went for a totally socialist way under Nyerere, nationalization again. So the result is that the Indians had to leave. And when they left, and their plight became particularly bad in Uganda, where the Idi Amin's atrocities became too well known, and so leaving their flourishing practice or jobs or businesses, they had to flee. Idi Amin, after a lot of negotiations, gave a meager compensation of about $10 million or pounds. I don't remember now whether it was dollars or pounds. I think it was dollars, to the government of India. Again, till today, you ask the children of those people who had to leave Uganda, Kenya, they say that the government of India did not stand up, and it sacrificed the interests of the Indian community to the larger foreign policy objective of relations with those African countries. Mrs. Gandhi did allow them to come to India. They could take temporary shelter. They were taken by the British. I hesitate not to. The majority of them had British passports, British passports, and it became an issue between Indian government and UK government. So most of them wanted to go to UK, and some who came to India, number of them did come for a year or 2 or 3 years. They remained and then they went to UK or Canada, or some were taken by Australia, New Zealand, etc. And so this was another policy challenge and a conflict of interest between the diaspora and the larger foreign policy objectives, as well as ability of India. This you will find all along, that the expectations of diaspora and how much can be met. A mismatch often has occurred in the past, as I am citing, and will occur in future. Now, expectation of diaspora is also unrealistically high. If you think of India, while post-71 war, militarily and politically, Indians regained a lot of prestige. But economically, India was in absolute shambles. Your generation is very fortunate, you wouldn't remember this. We paid a special Bangladesh stamp was put on any letter, document originating had to have that stamp of those days in 72 of 71 onwards of 5 paisa to pay for the 10 million Bangladeshi refugees that we had hosted, and then the economic crisis that had followed. It had led to severe austerity measures in India. So much so, as I remember as a young Foreign Service officer, the Foreign Service officials did not, we normally would get one home leave passage in a posting abroad to be able to come home once. That passage was abolished as an economy measure during that time. So in my posting in Tokyo, I never got back to India. I only came here after I had completed my tenure in Tokyo and before going to Jakarta. So severe economy, and India in that position was hardly in a position to take up any issue forcefully or provide major economic incentive. So within that, I think they did reasonably well. Now we come to the minor challenges in Caribbean. Again, because of Cold War, where India was seen to be on the side of Soviet Union, it was tilting, you can say, and because of the dependence on the veto on Jammu and Kashmir issue and the economic policy. So because of that, the Western world did not want government with people of Indian origin in Caribbean. So Chedi Chagan, who was the most popular leader, in the interim government, he won the election hands down. And he was as Dominion, he was the Prime Minister. But the CIA ensured through a rigged election process that Chedi Chagan does not become the Prime Minister when the independence came. And he was kept out of power till the Cold War was over, till there was no Soviet Union anymore. Chedi Chagan could come back to power only in 1992. So, Indians faced the wrath of the Afro-Trinidadians, Afro-Guyanese, in all these places, and were relegated to more or less second-class citizens. And the government of India could not forcefully take up their cause, or that was the feeling of the people there. These were the challenges up to Indira Gandhi. Now from 73 onwards, as you are aware, with the oil boom, emerged a new segment of Indian diaspora in the Gulf. Today they are about 4 million or 4.5 million, maybe around 4 million our friends in will always say they are 5 million, but I don't think so. It could be 4.5 million. Because of extreme foreign exchange difficulties, the priority of the government from Indira Gandhi's time became getting the remittances from these people in the 70s. So what in my writings have described that Indira Gandhi's diaspora policy was primarily remittance-centric diaspora policy. This became an important part of our foreign exchange management, of which we were always short of. Now again you have the indenture story repeated in a slightly better form. I have no hesitation in saying this in front of any Arab. They are the worst violators of human rights in the world. They treat their foreign labor more or less same way as the colonial powers treated the slaves, and get away with it because of their energy and because of our own weakness, that you have such unemployment in India. People want to make it big, want to be able to send remittances from there, and gradually from the 70s to now there is a world of difference. The situation has improved substantially from what it was in the 70s and 80s. But all the same, and we would politely mention in bilateral meetings, but we could never aggressively tell these Gulf countries that what you are doing is in blatant disregard of the human rights of these people, which is what deserved to be told. I mean, which is what, if they ill-treated a European, they would be told. So this was a period of remittance-centric diaspora policy. Then comes post Indira Gandhi comes Rajiv Gandhi on scene. Rajiv Gandhi remained for one tenure only. Primarily, of course, he was also dependent. Remittances were a key area. Now here was but a young man of exactly my age, that time a young man, and who thought that there is need to modernize India, and the world scene was fast changing from late 80s, from mid 80s onwards, and some reforms were already talked about in Soviet Union. China was galloping with reforms. So he started talking in terms of 21st century India. And he said, what do we do? 21st century India would have to have greater knowledge power. And he saw a role for these diaspora in fulfilling that knowledge gap and in modernizing India. So he would interact with these technocrats primarily, and he brought this Sam Pitroda and quite a lot of other people. Sam Pitroda became a little more famous because one, he was politically more savvy than the others Rajiv Gandhi had brought, and secondly the telecom sector was such crying need of reform that you couldn't make a STD call. I mean, wait list for a telephone, a very basic need, would be 10 years. So result was Sam Pitroda became a very well-known name, and he created these booths all over. He gave this policy set up for this CDOT. So, and many others came. And he started talking in terms of liberalizing the policy to enable these people to participate in the development of India and meeting the knowledge gap. So this is also the time from the late 70s, 80s that you have when Mrs. Gandhi returned second time. You have Mr. Pratap Reddy, Dr. Pratap Reddy of Apollo Group returning from Missouri. You have Naresh Trehan coming for escorts along with, what's his name, the fellow, our former President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad's son. Actually, he was the one who had this idea of setting up this hospital. They came together and lead was of him, but he didn't have the same degree of staying power. So he gave up after 2-3 years when the things were not falling in place, and Naresh stayed on, and in partnership with the Nandas set up this escort, and you see the difference it has made. So now number of policies started coming from 70s where no foreign investment would be permitted, but some NRI investment would be permitted. But they were foreigners also. NRI investment would be permitted in those states. So many of such areas, they were open to NRI investment but not otherwise foreign investment. Number of these schemes that came from 70s, NRO account, NRE account, these kind of banking instruments that came in to mobilize remittances and money, channelize the NRI money. And non-resident Indian itself, it's a tax definition. A person who stays out of India for more than 182 days. That was the rationale of calling them non-resident Indian. Now, this is the time, with this vision, gradually the Indians in the developed world started acquiring much greater clout. They started settling down, and they were missing the country. They had still not integrated with the local communities. They had not become part of the mainstream. And they were very concerned what will happen to their next generation, what will happen, their daughter will go on dating when she finishes high school. All those concerns, to a Tamilian Brahmin, this idea was a very disturbing thought. So, result was that they had a longing. So they started making this demand. Those who up to 60s was no problem. The US was not giving citizenship. There was very small number for Asians. Total number was so small Indians couldn't think of it. But 65 change of Lyndon Johnson presidency, now it became possible for them to stay. And to reach higher, they realize if they are not American citizens, there is a glass ceiling. So this dilemma they started facing. And this demand for dual citizenship started growing. And this demand came. It acquired more momentum as they became more wealthy, more successful, as their clout increased in the American, particularly led by the Indians in America. As they became more influential, more a part of mainstream, this became more forceful. And the government looked at, Rajiv Gandhi's government looked at various options. We had to, Iran-Iraq war, we had to bring people, evacuate people from Iran, Iraq. They came back. So they created a separate division in the ministry. Then after the war was over, they abolished that division a few years later, merged it with the consular passport and visa division because there was so much of overlap in the work of the two. So they abolished that division. So for a short period there was a joint secretary, overseas Indians, then it got a finance ministry driven it was, mainly So Finance Ministry created this thing called Commissioner for Non-Resident Indians. And his main role was to mobilize NRI investment and NRI remittances. He was a Finance Ministry person. He concurrently, the same man was the head of the India Investment Center. He combined the two jobs. So India Investment Center was renamed or rechristened to India Investment Center and Commissioner for NRIs. An advisory committee was formed in the Finance Ministry. We were all asked to recommend some names of what can be done. Then comes now 90s. There is no Soviet Union. The Cold War is over. India and America are no longer seen, have a different now new phase of relationship. Because that's very important. The relationship between host country where they are settled and relationship between the mother country. And a new immigrant is insecure. So if there is a conflict of interest, by and large, he may internally sympathize, but his position will be in favor of the host country, generally. Now there was no conflict. Narasimha Rao was reaching out to America.